So it's 6:11 on April 19th, and we're going to call this meeting to order of the Maple Run Unified School District Board of Directors meeting. So for the agenda review, is there anything that needs to be added or subtracted from the agenda that you guys can see? We are going to need to add an executive session to discuss student issues and negotiations. So, if everyone could stand to say the Pledge of Allegiance.
This flag kind of over there in
Yep.
the corner.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Alrighty, so the next section is for visitors. Do we have any visitors that want to speak? Anyone in the chat?
Nobody said it yet, but usually takes just a minute for it to go through.
I guess.
You do?
Yes,
Okay.
please. I'm just kind of curious on the agenda is something about a bus,
Okay.
and is that built into the budget already, or was that above and beyond our budget? I know I'm probably thinking,
Can you speak to that?
We'll speak to that when we get to the item.
So we'll speak to that when we get to the item.
okay, I just,
Alright.
that was curiosity.
Anyone else in the chat, John?
Nobody online?
Alrighty. So for the consent agenda, unless anyone objects, we'll accept the agenda. Any objections to the consent agenda? Alright, then we are on to reports to the board. So the student board representative, announcements, Sarah.
Hi.
Thank you for being here.
Yeah. So I pretty much only have one thing to share, and it's about the summit that we held on Saturday that I actually wasn't at. I had to work, fortunately. I was very sad about it. And I know that some of you were there, so feel free to chime in about it. But yeah, so we conducted interviews, and the students were really involved with it. And from what I've heard really good things, that it went really well, and that Leah said she was about to start crying. So I guess it was really meaningful and helpful. Yeah, so thanks for coming and supporting that.
Do you want to talk a little bit about producing the video that was shown there? Just
Yeah.
help do that.
So we had some questions. I think was it 3 questions? 3 main questions that we had to talk to. And each of our group members, we each picked 1 or 2 people, and then we interviewed them and had the digital media tech center students film it and edit it and everything, which was really, really great. But we asked them the questions, and we'd kind of prompt them to get them to keep going, and they had some really, really good responses about bullying and diversity and just what we can do to make the school better and what they think our weaknesses, which was really great, and strengths.
It was really powerful.
Good.
I left at the end of the day feeling really kind of, quite honestly, quite sad and also hopeful.
Good.
Anything else?
No. Well, our voice committee had a meeting with Up for Learning today, just more about getting our group getting going, and it was good.
So the next thing on the agenda, actually the next thing is, I just wanted to thank you, Kelsey, for having the school open for us, and showing us around, and whole 9 yards. The envisioning plan, attachment 6B, I think, John, you're going to speak to that?
I will. I'm actually going to project as well, so give me 1 second to get that up. Okay.
It says that you're sharing.
This is part of a reoccurring series of reports to the board about academic performance related to the goals in the envisioning plan. And I've actually kept, you may even recognize the template for the slides. I've kept it the same to be consistent throughout. And because we do have a new contingent of board members on the board, I thought we could start actually with a recap from the start of the year, just to ground us all in the conversation the same way. After that, I wanted to share a little bit of the current data that we have and the progress that and work that we've been engaged in this year. Share what we see next steps as, and then also share some of the dilemmas that we're wrestling with right now as we try to plot the course for next year, and invite the board into the conversation about some of those dilemmas. So we kicked off the year with a flurry of news in the community and across the entire country, and there were quite a few conversations in our state as well about this crisis, this once-in-a-lifetime crisis that was being talked about with the NAEP, our national test that measures reading and mathematics performance across public schools in the United States. Seeing a really record decline that people broadly attributed to the effects of the pandemic. So we talked about it through the lens of literacy in particular, and I can pull back a little bit why we did that, but it is important to know that when we were engaging in the conversation here, we were also talking about long-term trends, because this has actually been a crisis that has been building in Vermont for over a decade. Vermont has a legacy of strong academic results that beginning really around 2012, 2013 began to erode, and you can see these are math and reading scores for 4th and 8th grade over time, and you can see the general trend line is very clear starting in 2013 that we're moving in the wrong direction.
Can you just collapse so we're down to
yep.
that one frame? So it just make it easier for people to see your slides.
Thank you. So this, of course, is not the direction that we want to be moving in. One of the things that we engaged in some discussion about at that board meeting is why this could be happening, especially because during the same time, national trends were moving in the other direction. So there were a few states, Vermont among them, that were seeing a decade-long plus decline in literacy and math scores, while other states were seeing really record improvement in those same areas. And key among those really, especially with literacy, was the movement towards a particular program or programs that have since really been debunked by research and science as having false underpinnings. And they're names that we all know and we've heard in schools all around the state. The Lucy Calkins Reader Writer Workshop series is a big one. And then any of the Fontes and Pinnell products, whether they were assessment programs, instructional programs, or intervention programs, have all been proven to be based on phony science now. And some of them now are in the progress of trying to reinvent themselves so that they continue to be eligible for the use of federal funds and continue to work in schools. But what we're seeing across the state is a wide-scale movement away from all of these programs, including you. So there are a couple key pieces that we wanted to emphasize. The first being a quote by the former Secretary of Education that really this is a long-term trend that has been impacting all of our schools. We talked about the alignment between what we're seeing statewide and the data that we have about our schools here at Maple Run, where across the board we could say pretty broadly about 1/3 of our students were on grade level with their reading ability. And then we talked really about how this has to be a call to action for us, and Bill really framed it nicely through the language of an imperative for us to address literacy in particular. at Maple Run, and actually asked the board to hold us accountable to that one task, if nothing else. So as part of that conversation, we also talked about where we saw some variation in the data. And the general trend that we see is that the lower you go in grade level, the less favorable the data appears. And that's twofold. One is because those are the students who are most impacted by COVID-related education shutdowns. So they had their sequence of learning when it comes to those foundational skills most disrupted. But also, those are the grades where students are learning those foundational reading skills. And really, all of the neuroscience is telling us now that once kids are past first grade, the neural pathways between the language centers of the brain start to harden. And so that means it becomes harder every year for students to learn and internalize that knowledge that they need to become fluent readers. And then really after third grade, it becomes very difficult for students to do that work. Not impossible, but much more time intensive and just much more difficult for the student to actually do, because they're not just doing something that is hard for them, but they're actually fighting their biology and the neuroscience. We also talked about the tremendous effort that teachers at Maple Run have been engaged in. And I mean, tremendous is not a big enough word. It has been an unbelievable effort across our schools. Lots of new learning for teachers. We have new tools and new programs that teachers are using. And the general theme from the pandemic has continued, with teachers just going above and beyond to meet kids where they are and help them access grade level learning. We also talked about the need for family and community partnerships, and I have some exciting things I'll tell you about later that have been taking shape there. Well, I guess I can actually tell you now. That's through the work of the Literacy Committee, we've prioritized two specific areas for community engagement. We have normal rounds of community engagement we do at school, right? So we've talked about, actually at board meetings, some of the literacy and science and technology and math events that we've had in different schools and the record turnout that we've had. You know, the last one that I was at Town School had over 300 students and their families there with them to engage in story time and play literacy games and do arts and crafts and just all leave with a free book. We're trying to put books into the hands of kids. But that's still not enough people, right? We want to get the books into the hands of more students. We want the kids who can't make it to events like that to get books and to be engaged in literacy. And we're really fortunate that in our area we have a partner organization that specializes in just that. So the bookmobile has been in the Franklin County Grand Isle bookmobile has been in transition for a couple of years now. They've become their own independent organization, and they are back and out in the community, engaging in the very work that we need help doing, which is connecting families and students with a love of reading. So we have rekindled that partnership. We actually just rekindled their book collection with a donation of several thousand books. We were the very lucky recipient of some grant funds that allowed us to spend about $14,000 on books to give away at these events, and we prioritized the bookmobile to make sure that they had access to all the same titles that we were giving away at these events. And they've actually already begun the community outreach in our Maple Run communities to give these books to families. The other area, which is one that is now just beginning in earnest, is members of the Literacy Committee working with local pediatricians to make sure that when children are coming in for a checkup, that they can also be given a book. And there's also a fantastic national program where pediatricians can give information to parents. They sign them up really easily. They just fill out a form, basically. And then students get free books mailed to them. It's actually funded by Dolly Parton. And that's something actually that we've heard many people didn't know was an option. or the people who did know it was an option were giving the forms to parents, and the parents were leaving with the forms. And so what we've asked is actually if they keep the forms, if they have the parents fill out the forms while they're in the appointment, we'll make sure they get mailed and processed appropriately so that the kids can get those books. We just want to try and remove as many barriers as possible for the process. You can also look for us at Maple Run and the Bookmobile in partnership with each other at every other farmers market this summer, giving away books and doing playing fun literacy games. You'll see your kids' teachers there and other community volunteers. So there'll be lots of good community love for reading, for sure. Okay. This was all of the other exciting work that's happened. I say exciting because that's my lens, but you may not be really into like different types of assessment methodology and pieces like that. But these are all really important pieces of the way that we're reinventing literacy and moving away from those programs I was mentioning earlier to programs that are actually now backed by the science of reading and have been proven over the past several decades to be effective. So we began actually early last year with the guaranteed and viable curriculum work across all of our content areas and articulating what was really important at each grade level in each of those areas. We began the work to adopt a new literacy program, comprehensive integrated literacy program. Actually, I'll pause there for 1 second. One of the challenges with literacy programs are they're either comprehensive and integrated, which means they contain all of the pieces necessary for students to learn how to read, or they are an assembly of many different sequences that are designed each to address individual components of reading. Neither one approach is better than the other, but the overwhelming request from teachers at Maple Run was that we choose a program that was integrated so that teachers did not have to balance between so many different tools at the same time that often have conflicting requirements for time, which is, as we know, our most precious resource in schools. We don't have enough time. We've also begun the use of new assessment tools to give us more accurate information at school. And then, of course, all of this has been coupled with an unbelievable amount of learning about the science of reading and assessments and programs, but other pieces as well, like project-based learning, restorative justice, and on and on and on. We wanted also to acknowledge all of this work is not happening in a vacuum. Literacy is not the only thing that's happening in our schools. The list is exhaustive. So there are lots of other things happening, and our view is actually that these things are all supportive of each other. Right? So if students feel like their social and emotional health is attended to in a classroom, they can better attend to learning, right? These are mutually reinforcing concepts. But universal meals is a great example. If kids aren't hungry, they can focus on learning. But we do know, conversely, if students are hungry in the classroom, they cannot actually attend to the task that they're being asked to. So that brings us to the mid-year check-in and where we are right now. I say mid-year because the most recent data pull we have is from the mid-year. And we have spent significant amount of time in our schools and as a leadership team working through this data. And actually the first thing that is worthy of celebration is the fact that we just have better data. That's not saying that the learning data is better, it is, but actually we have a more comprehensive assessment set of data. So that means in the past we've always had pockets of kids that we've missed, and we've had a huge effort this year to make sure that we assessed every kid, which we know it's not possible. There'll be kids with long-term absences and a few kids that get missed during assessment windows, but we have substantially reduced that number so that 99% of the kids in the grade levels we're assessing have been assessed, which is a huge success and a big positive change compared to our historical performance. Then, of course, we have more students reading on grade level. I'm not getting into the specifics of the data because this is actually, the mid-year assessments are not designed to give you like a kind of report card on your progress. because it's not statistically significant to measure from September to December, right? It's not enough time in the learning sequence to do a really fully accurate data pull. What we really want to look at is the data we get in May and compare that to where we were at the start of the year. But that said, we have seen growth in all grade levels and in almost all students, which is a nice positive trend to see. And of course, we've also been working, we have like the super adopters, I've called them, right? The people who have taken the new literacy program and thrown themselves into it and run from the very start of the school year. And we have seen the strongest concentration of growth in those classrooms. And the thing that is amazing actually in those classrooms is the amount of growth that the students who are significantly below grade level are making, which is best case scenario. We've kept everybody growing and the students that were behind the most are growing most. We've also had overwhelmingly positive feedback from that group that has fully implemented the program starting from the start of this year. Now, there are some other pieces for us to consider. The first is we don't have enough time to deliver any of our academic programs at all. And I'll talk more about what that means. But literacy is a great example. There's a huge body of research that speaks to the number of minutes that are required for students to learn how to read. And we are not able to hit those targets. We are closer with math, and then even further away with science and social studies. And so I actually have those recommendations spelled out on in a slide or two, and I'll show you exactly what they are. The other thing that we are really struggling with is that core or first instruction is not protected in the way that our schools operate. So that means that if I was a 6th grade literacy teacher, during my reading blocks, I could have students that are pulled out for band, right? Now, we want everybody that wants to have band to be able to take band, but it is also really not appropriate for kids to be pulled out of learning how to read so that they can learn how to play an instrument. So there's all of this push and pull between the things that are important in our community as we really examine these issues. The other big issue that we're facing is what I call the extreme learner variety in the classrooms. We've always had a variety of students at different learning levels in the classroom, but it has never quite been this extreme because of some of those students who are coming from really significantly far behind. Kids in particular that really struggled during the pandemic, the early years of the pandemic, and have not been able to get their feet under them since then. And so what that does is really further complicate the job of the classroom teacher that has to meet the needs of all those different learners at the same time, and put really extreme needs on the staff that we have to deliver intervention. And so when I say intervention, I'm actually talking about intervention with a capital I, which means it's totally normal for a classroom teacher to provide intervention when a kid doesn't get something, right, or when a group of students don't get something. That's what we would call like tier 1 to 1.5 or tier 1 to tier 2 intervention. But we also have specialists that deliver what we would call tier 2 and tier 3 interventions, which are more durable in time and more significant in effort. And we struggle to get all the kids who need intervention the appropriate amount of time. There are a few things that we learned, though, that are positive as well. So we had what I like to call a menu option for teachers to select where they opted into the adoption of the new literacy programs. It's very easy to just say we should flip the switch and start right now. And that, unfortunately, doesn't accurately meet the needs of kids in classrooms. We have very many classrooms that loop. This is just an example. And so you might have students that were coming into the year in a classroom that was partway through a course of study. And so it's very hard with all the different structures we have, and there's a lot of different learning structures between our 3 pre-K-8 schools to flip a switch and get everybody to implement a program on the same time frame. And actually, as luck would have it, giving people the choice about when it was right for them and their students to take on the new program has been really successful. And people have felt very empowered to make the choice that was right for them and right for their kids. And I think that is actually one of the reasons why we've had such overwhelmingly positive feedback about the program implementation. The other piece is that providing quality instructional coaching and time for colleagues to meet and support each other in the adoption of the new program has been really successful as well. I will say that we do not have an equitable amount of time across all grade levels for that to happen, and that's something we want to improve on for next year. So these were the pieces that we said we were going to do this year and come back to report on. So we said that we were going to look at ways that we could continue to support and improve first instruction. So that's the classroom every kid gets in their class, their standard default class. We were going to continue the improvement and development of intervention programs for students that need extra support. We talked about time on learning studies, which has turned out to be a tremendous effort, but one I'm happy to be able to report out on. And then the community and family partnerships piece. So that brings us to the big one, which is time. So we have engaged, the curriculum committees have studied and looked at the different programs that are out there, as well as the research on time on learning. We engaged Katie Novak as a consultant on the topic as well. She's a leader in school improvement and universal design for learning. And then the leadership team has spent a tremendous amount of time picking apart these issues at the pre-K-8 level. So this second bullet about protected learning time is actually the thing that is the hardest. So I think it might be good if I walk everybody through this and then I pause to see if there are questions about it. The first thing that's important to note is that this learning time has to be protected, right? Katie Novak calls it sacred space. And that is that idea that we cannot have students pulled out of their core instruction. So if you're a third grade student, you shouldn't be pulled out of your third grade literacy or third grade math classes really for any reason, because then you're losing access to grade level instruction. So that's something I've already identified has been an issue for us. So these are the general consensus on the minimum number of minutes daily that are required for a student to be able to learn the Common Core, which is our set of standards. So for literacy, K through third grade is 120 minutes a day. Fourth and fifth grade is 90 minutes a day, and then beyond that is 60. Math is a very nice, even, consistent 60 minutes, which is exactly what we'd expect for math teachers. Science and social studies in the early grades, there's a little bit more space to be variable and flexible, and so it's 30 minutes a day or 60 minutes every other day. And then really, when we talk about that time for intervention, it's at least 30 minutes a day, where both a classroom teacher and an interventionist have access to their group of students. There's a lot of newer research that calls for additional time in grades 3 through 5, because that's where we're noticing this bubble of students with lots of variability in terms of what they can do, what they know, and what they can do. And so providing extra time there for the classroom teacher and for the interventionist to have access to those students is a priority. So I've been talking for a while, and I just dumped a whole lot of numbers. So I'll pause and see if there are any questions about that. Or if it makes
I just had
sense.
a quick question.
Sure.
Okay. So I get the time, and you were saying that the plan is to not take them out of that for any reason. So I know, for example, my daughter gets extra help in reading and math. So she does get pulled out to do actually the Wilson program, which has been wonderful.
Yep.
Now, would you guys be okay, since that is still considered literacy? And I know you said, trying to keep her on that level, and she's there now, but prior to her stepping into that class and learning or being taught what other kids were already at, she was lost before that. So they were pulling her out and helping her get there. Now, with the Wilson program, she's where she's supposed to be.
Yep.
But is that something, because it's still literacy?
So,
Is that confusing?
no, it's not at all.
Okay.
And this is an issue that comes up all the time. What happens with kids who aren't at grade level, right? And where do they go? And so I'll make it generic.
Okay,
instead of
yeah, perfect.
specific
No, that's
answer. But the general consensus is that students should stay in their core level of instruction outside of some really specific examples.
Okay.
Because they won't catch up with a Wilson or any of the Orton Gillingham programs, or like Haggerty is another really popular intervention program. Those programs are designed to help kids catch up on the fundamentals. And what we're banking on, and what the designers of those programs bank on, is that they still have the conceptual understanding from the grade level classes. And that doesn't mean they have mastery of it yet, but it means that they've been exposed to it, and that with a little bit of support in the classroom, they should be able to engage with it once they catch up with the fundamentals.
So that would be like other times during the day when, say, some kids are at band, would be a good time to pull some of those kids for literacy or math help, to give them that.
Exactly, with an asterisk.
Right.
So what we've done very successfully in some of our schools is structure a block of time, and right now every school calls it something different. But like you could be called win time, or some schools call it ice time or exploratory time. Generally, the best practice would be that you have at least a half an hour that's protected for those students and their classroom teacher. The classroom teacher has all the students working on something, but is focusing on the kids in the class that might need the most help in that moment. Excuse me. If you have more than half an hour, it's not uncommon for some of that time also to be shared with some of the exploratory options, like band or chorus, where kids can get pulled out for those types of things, or for lessons. What we really try to avoid, or what we should try to avoid, is have it be that kids have to pick between an essential service, like an intervention that helps them learn how to read, and being able to attend band or art, or those pieces. Because the reality is, if you look at any student over a 3-year period, there's an over 85% chance that they will need additional help at least 3 times, right? It's not always once a year, so it doesn't quite work out that way. But everybody at some point stumbles, they miss a class, and they really benefit from a little bit of individualized attention or small group attention from a teacher that can help them catch up. And so it's not a detriment to anybody to keep people together as a group and offer them support.
Thank you.
John, just based on experience, I'm going to respectfully disagree with you. In that I think when you put a child that is way behind into a class, it's like us sitting into, pardon the expression, sitting into a Latin class and not know what's going on, and we quickly lose interest in it and become a discipline problem. And that's what I found through my teaching. And I can see pulling them out to give them a quick catch-up and then inserting them back in, but to have them sit there and listen to Greek, which they're not getting at the time, I think that puts a lot of pressure on the child and causes discipline issues. And then you're looking at, and it's a problem that needs to be discussed. Everyone wants every kid to be able to do everything, and some of them truly need the extra time in reading and in whatnot. So does that mean some kids don't get band? Maybe we put band at the end of the day, or maybe we put it someplace where it doesn't interfere with what we know as adults are the more important things in their life. But those are choices that have to be made, and they're tough choices. Because, like I said, we want to give every child everything, and that's not possible.
Yeah, so I would say that I actually have a couple questions about these dilemmas that I'm going to pose to you all, because these are actually the very questions that we've posed in the leadership team. And that second piece of what you're saying is dead on with something that we're really struggling with right now. We want every child to be able to have access to everything. And the reality is that we don't have the time or resources to be able to do that.
Right.
So that's part of what I'm going to share with all of you in just a second. And I know we disagree on that first part.
Sure.
I would say that the overwhelming consensus in the field is that the moment we take kids out of core instruction, they never catch up. And so that is really the piece that drives all of these improvement efforts and the push to keep kids in the core classroom. It is difficult, and there are issues that come up that we have to really rally around kids and teachers to support them. But yeah, that's the dilemma.
I would never say this out loud, but I may be wrong.
John, the question I have, being a former
Yep.
music teacher, when you say being pulled out for band, you mean for lessons?
Not always.
I mean, the actual band class is something where kids are pulled out?
Yes, in some cases.
It's not a scheduled thing?
So it could be that we have real examples that we've looked at where kids were pulled out of, and I always struggle with the language. I've never worked at a school that has the right words for this, right? And so I really hate like classifying certain classes as core and not core. I hate all of that vocabulary. But we have lots of kids who are pulled out of either intervention or literacy instruction or math instruction, social studies, science, for a regularly occurring band class. And the way that it's all through the best of intentions, but it does happen usually in the second part of a class. And I think the thinking was that if kids get exposure to the first part of the lesson, they get the bulk of it, and then they can go for band or for chorus or whatever the case may be. The reality is that it's not working that way. And I should also say, like, we're not meeting these minutes, so to pull kids out of less than these minutes really sets them back. And I would say all of the research that sets these up as the minimums, these are for kids that are on grade level, not for kids that are coming from behind. So
I do have to say that town school does, I know for SATEC for me, for my kids, it's really great because at the end of the day is when they get to do like their choice. So that's when the whole, like they're done all their core classes, right? And then it's like these kids get to go to chorus and these guys get to go this. And it might not be a whole lot of time, but I think that way the kids aren't missing that stuff. But again, try and fit that into K through 8, right? Like that's probably impossible, but I like the idea of that, but.
Unless there are other questions about the timepieces, I feel like I could move us into that dilemma discussion. Does that work?
Yeah.
Sure.
So just while we're talking about stakes, the stakes being so high, right, and having to make choices that are going to impact our kids, I always like to go back to a few certain researchers, right? Marzano is one of the famous ones. John Hattie is another one, or DeFore is another one, because they're not actually citing, or they do cite individual studies, but the bulk of their work is looking at the consensus in the field, right? So over thousands or hundreds or thousands of studies, what are the findings? Not just in a few individual studies. And really this idea of being very intentional about what we guarantee for curriculum and then making sure it's viable, that students and teachers have enough time for it, on the systems level is really the most influential thing we can do for student learning. If we talk about the biggest influencer that we have control over in terms of student learning is the quality of the teacher in front of the child, but from a systems perspective, this is the biggest thing. So you could phrase these dilemmas any number of ways, and as a matter of fact, many of you have actually done this already. But we do not have enough time to reach those minimum minutes as it is, not without making some really hard choices or giving some things up. And so these are some potential conversation starters. They are ones that have come right from some of the conversations with the leadership team. So balancing the need to protect first instruction, right, that core instruction for students, with the need for intervention for so many students. How do we balance between those two? How do we protect the variety of other learning opportunities? And so that's that, like, how do we protect students' access to band? How do we protect students' access to French or to Spanish and art? While also making sure they have enough time to actually learn the curriculum that we guarantee, right, or that we're mandated for them to have to learn. And then really, when we talk about that, choice is like a really powerful thing. So by the time students get to high school, they actually have to make a tremendous number of choices about what they want to study, and if they want to take an art class versus a music class versus, or visual art versus music versus drama and those pieces. And it feels very natural at the high school level. But when we look at the middle and the elementary school level, we have systems that have really been developed to kind of give kids everything that they want, but it really comes at the expense of really what has been articulated by the federal government and the state as our core responsibilities in the area of literacy, math, science, and social studies. So there are potential things that could give to make space for this, right? We have transition time, which is always difficult, so that's hard to cut, but that's something we could look at. There's recess and lunchtime. There's time for the unified arts, time for electives or lessons for things like band and music. And then these are the conversation starters, but you get the idea. So the leadership team is very curious to actually hear your thoughts or hear your discussion about any of these issues that have come up, because we are reaching the point where we have to come to some decisions about things that we would like to bring back to you and propose for next year.
I have a question. So the win exploration, whatever they want to call it, time, that's separate from like another time where students could do like an elective, say band or French or stuff like that, or is that the same time?
So right now it's the same time in many of our schools, but what on that list of minimums or the consensus on minimums, that really is that 30 minutes or 60 in grades 3 through 5 is really about protected time that would not be subject to that.
Okay.
How soon do they start things like band? Is that middle school?
Fourth grade?
Fourth and
Yeah,
fifth?
so it's a little different in each school, but generally in that upper elementary range is when you start with the differentiated music classes, and before that it's general music.
Is it possible to do a little bit of integration? In other words, science and literacy, teach science through literacy or literacy through science? I mean, I would think that there's, through social studies and whatnot, I would think that there's some movement there.
There is the opportunity for some efficiency,
Right.
And it's usually on the science or the social studies side. So we did select a program for literacy that integrates content knowledge from social studies and science
Right.
across all of the reading. And so it doesn't address any of the NGSS or the C3, those skill-based standards that we're supposed to be teaching kids for science and social studies, but it addresses a lot of the content that we would want kids to learn. And so if in our social studies and our science classes, we could connect to the reading kids are doing about science and social studies in their literacy classes, and then do the skill-based work with them, we could have some efficiency, but
Right.
yeah.
I mean, the bottom line is the kids need to learn how to read or they're not going to learn anything.
Yes.
And we, as a group here, need to seriously look at what we're doing with our students and saying, okay, that's a priority. That, above all else, they need to know how to read and they need to know how to do their basic math. Everything else is fluff. I mean, it's nice fluff, but it's fluff. Because if they can't read, when they get out to the real world, if they can't read, they are in a big hole that they'll never dig themselves out of. And I think that as a board, we need to make tough decisions on just what our priority is. And you basically laid that out today, what our priority should be.
I'll just point out, you are a former social studies teacher, right?
Science.
Sorry. That adds to the impact of that statement, yeah.
So John, during my 50 years in education, when I was a music teacher, and then got stupid and became an administrator, but when I was a music teacher, I had to fight that battle all the time. I had the opposite problem. I had teachers wanting to take my kids all the time. Oh, they gotta make up the calculus class. They gotta do this. Oh, they had a pie in the oven in their home ec class and they had to wait until it was done. I said, well, throw it in the trash can and send them to my class, because we have a concert next week. So, and I also believe in STEAM, not STEM.
Yep.
Science, technology, engineering, arts, and math.
Yes.
And I would venture to say, I don't have any studies on this, but I bet if you took those art and band kids and compared their reading with kids who were not in those things, even though they might have missed their general class or their first instruction, I bet they do pretty well. Or is there, and you would know this and I don't, is there research that really says kids who were pulled out for the arts or whatever, are they really behind? Because my thinking is those usually are, like, being able to play an instrument supposedly helps with math.
Yep.
Okay, and I bet they're better readers, perhaps. The other question I have is, when I was a music teacher, it depended on who was the principal and if they knew how to schedule. Because the better the scheduler was, the happier everybody was.
Yes.
Because if they left something off to the end and said, oh, well, to do that, we're gonna have to pull kids out. Instead of scheduling the school so there was an exact time for music, an exact time for literacy.
Yep.
Because I agree with you. You know, even though I was a music teacher, I totally understand that math, literacy, the foundations
Yep.
are more important than, as Peter would say, the fluff. I guess I was a fluff teacher. But
In all fairness, so was he apparently.
But, when I get in my car and I turn on my radio, I don't hear calculus equations and so forth. I hear music, you know, and when I go to a museum, I look at art. Okay?
Yep.
But, so the time factor, it could be that we don't have enough time during the day because our day isn't long enough.
Yep.
And when I went to China, kids were in class from 8 o'clock in the morning till 8 at night. I'm not saying their system's any better because all the great scientists and inventors and everything come from the United States, but, and they're over here going to our colleges because we have the better stuff. But you bring up the point of the pulling out,
Yep.
and that just reminds me of some of my experiences back and forth with that, and that I think the arts are an important, just like I think sports. I was a football coach, but I think sports is important, and I think arts are important. But the first instruction, like you're saying, is important, so it is a dilemma. And I think the answer is good scheduling, in my opinion.
It's a really naughty situation. On my end, I basically had kids, so I had someone to read to at bedtime, so I'm very, like, everyone's got things that make their brain, their heart sing, and literacy is that thing for me. At the same time, I'm sitting here thinking about if I were to tell my son that he has to cut down on his instrument time, that would be devastating to him. So it's a really tough thing to balance. And on the scheduling angle of it, I'm wondering if there are any, if you would be able to provide any sort of sample schedules, like either like hypotheticals or that other districts are implementing that in an attempt to solve this problem, that we might be able to look at and kind of weigh the pros and cons of as examples.
Just one other, I know like I think it's the same for Saks, but I don't know about Fairfield because I haven't seen that, but I know for SATEC, if they wanted to do, say, the play at school, that was something that they had to do after, and then you get into the whole like teacher, I understand the whole dilemma in that, but I definitely know that I was happier that she stayed after school to do that rather than get pulled from the classes that she's now finally successful in. I don't know how far you could go with that because then it requires people to stay after and whatnot, but I think that was partially a good way to.
Yeah, I hope I didn't come across as a Philistine, but I'm just saying that those things are important, but
Yeah.
you have to have priorities.
Right.
And I agree, music is nice when you turn it on, but that was invented by a scientist. The reason you have the ability to turn that on is because someone knew science and math and they could communicate that skill. And I think those are all important. I don't want to degrade those at all. The use of the word fluff was incorrect but I'm just saying that we
See,
do
now
have a
science is
priority.
important.
If they can't read, everything else is pitiful. It's a sad world for them to grow up in if they can't read. And we still meet adults every so often that can't write. I mean, those things are still around us, and they're just not making it. It's got to be a sad life if you can't read or write or do basic math. And I think that as a group, we need to prioritize.
And for me, not every so often. I see it on a pretty regular basis.
Exactly.
People coming in who
Yeah.
I have to fill out the forms for them.
Mm-hmm.
Sarah?
I mean, I want to say that, like, as a student in high school, like, when I was younger, I think I struggled with literacy a little bit when I was really young. And then I caught up, and then when it came for, when the opportunity came for me to do the arts, that was something that I was super excited about, and I got super involved in that. And my academics have been fine ever since. Like, I haven't fallen behind ever since, but, like, I do think that, like, it is so important for students, and I think that it should be built into the schedule, and I don't think it should be a pull-out thing, because, like, that's how people channel their imagination and their creativity, and I think kids especially need that in their lives, and I think that, like, if they, if you push it back even further in a student's life, like, no one joins band in high school. Like, you have to start when everyone starts, and I think that that's, like, I think that's so important.
But I also think if you don't have the foundation of reading, those kids who go to do the plays, they're not going to be able to read the script. The kids who go to do band aren't going to have the skills, right? So it's just another building block. But I think those core things are so expensive, so important.
So John, I'll make one last statement because I talked too much. What I found was for the lessons, to rotate the time so they're not being pulled out of the same time period every day, and just do a rotating thing so that maybe once every 2 weeks it would be part of a literacy thing, but it wouldn't be every day. And but the band thing, the whole group should be scheduled, or chorus or art or whatever it is.
I might be able just to address some of these pieces and also maybe take a little bit of pressure out of the room because it feels really heavy, right? And I can say it's felt very heavy for the leadership team the past couple times we've met as we've talked about these same issues. I've actually, as a principal, one of my things that I loved and enjoyed was actually scheduling, right? And I've always had great partners I've worked with that, but I have never actually worked with a team of people who could schedule to the ability level that our pre-K-8 principals can. Like they are truly masterminds of the schedule, and I will totally give a shout out to Angela at SATEC. Like after the first conversation, I don't think she could sleep until she had worked up several different variations of schedules on spreadsheets, and so I feel very confident saying it's not an allocation of our existing time issue. I think the two real issues are, and the biggest one is, what is the role that choice plays? Because it's not binary. Like we can have the time on learning for all of the academic pieces we've talked about, or band and music and art. It really is to the degree which kids can take all of those things. We have very many students that take all. And so if students have to make some choices about what they start taking as they get older, once they're done with that exploratory phase of looking at the different unified arts that they could be involved in, then that is actually easy for us to guarantee at the same time as increasing the time on learning minutes to meet these requirements or get very close to them anyways. It's when we guarantee that kids can take all of those other programs that we run into these problems. And I will also just say, to answer your question, because it's a very good one, almost 80% of kids that are getting intervention get pulled from intervention for some of these classes. So it's not just the kids that are doing well academically that are taking the band and art and getting the lessons. And so I think that's also an important thing to acknowledge.
I like that, John. I think that makes great sense.
So I don't float that as my proposed solution. I float
Yeah, I
that
was
for
gonna,
you all to talk about.
Yeah, and I do wanna say at the next meeting or the meeting after, I think, we're hoping it's gonna be the next meeting, because we're hoping we're gonna land on a decision to bring to you and say, this is what the leadership team's decided. But it's around making some hard choices, and we recognize as a leadership team, I think you said it well, Peter, we can't give everyone everything. And that's what we're challenged with, because the district has, just as John said, students who want to take everything, that's been supported.
Yes.
We might be at the time where we have to change that.
Yeah.
And in terms of, I think it makes a lot of sense to say, like, after you've explored what you like, you're gonna have to pick what you really like.
You might have two of your three of what you really like.
Yeah, I mean, I'm getting to that point with my son where it's like, eventually you're gonna have to pick between hockey and theater. And I have definitely my preference as to what he thinks.
And I think in some ways that happens naturally as you edge towards high
Yes.
school.
Yeah.
Yes.
And I'm wondering, is there a thought in mind as to when that sort of transition happens?
That's what we're working on now, and I really don't want to go too much further into the solution, because I want to protect the leadership team as they're having their discussions right now, to have the space to have that, and not feel like if I said something tonight, well, Bill, you just made the decision for us.
Right.
And so that's why I'm being vague. I want them to have the time to do the work that they're doing.
And I'm assuming to the extent that the data is available, that it's, the conclusions are looking at data in terms of how, in terms of exploring these conclusions.
We've looked, I don't have any, I mean, John, you've been leading more of this than I have, but I think there's been a lot of looking at different schedules and what there is out there. I don't think, a couple of years ago, maybe it was 5 years ago, our principals went to an institute on scheduling and found it pretty elementary, and I hate to use that word because we're talking about elementary schools, but it was like, we're a little more sophisticated than that. And these are supposed to be some of the folks that could really help with scheduling.
I also think that teaching you can pick 2 out of 3, which is what you said, I think is a great life lesson as well, right? Like, as you get older, you're not gonna be able to do everything, and I think that can be such a great teaching moment.
And I don't want to
too.
say that's the solution.
No, right, but I just was using, right.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think we can use that, though.
So we wanted to let the board know kind of
Awesome.
where we're at.
Good work.
Sorry, I'm butting in on you.
No, it's
great.
I appreciate it. And if you're interested in reading a little bit more about any of these issues, I've taken to including four further reading slides. And in the digital version, if you click on the link, it will take you to it. If you only read one thing, the Marzano piece at the top here is really interesting. This was the first paper he wrote on the topic. And he has then since become the expert on the amount of time necessary for students to learn the Common Core, and you can read all of the following versions as they become more refined and aligned with the standards that we have to deal with now. It's really, it's a compelling and it's a pretty easy read.
Thanks, guys.
Alrighty,
Thanks, John.
I think we're gonna, thank you. Move on to old business. So, the first thing is this bias and anti-racism training. Do you wanna speak to that?
Bye, Sarah.
Well, I was hoping, we had the summit on, thank you, Sarah.
See you later.
Thank you, Sarah.
We
Sarah,
had,
thanks for the coffee.
Anytime.
Next
Tell him
time.
that.
on Saturday, we held a community summit at BFA, and I know Charlie and Joanna and Jack and Susan were there. And I was actually hoping maybe the 4 of you could speak a little bit about the day. Sarah talked about it from what she had heard and helping prep for it, and from students that were in attendance. We had 3 or 4 students. We had 5 students there in attendance. But maybe what people thought, and that was some of our latest work.
I unfortunately missed the beginning of the day, and I showed up just in time for lunch, which was excellent time.
It's good lunch too.
Yeah, excellent lunch. So most of my day was sitting in on the rigorous academics group and joining in the discussion there. But I thought it was overall I thought it was a very good discussion, and I don't necessarily know that there were a lot of hard solutions that came out of it, but there was a lot of giving voice to the problems that are standing in the way of rigorous academics, which is a good starting point. The big thing that I kind of wondered afterwards is in terms of the dissemination, because I think a lot of the people who were there for 6 hours on a Saturday are the folks who are already very much engaged in schools. So, and the problems that the obstacles that folks are, or that schools are facing is more or less a community thing. So it's a matter of trying to get those words and those thoughts out into the larger community in a way that they'll engage with.
I thought the district took a risk by showing a video of kids telling their story, telling what things they were struggling with and whatever, but it gave everybody listening, all the adults listening and the other kids, a real viewpoint into how many kids feel going through a school experience. And I'm sensing that the educational programs, even though I kind of defended band a little bit, I think the work that John does and the work that the schools do are fantastic work. And so I thought it was a very interesting way of getting to, what are some of the issues we have to deal with, but it sort of highlighted some of the good things, even though they were talking about some negative things. The school system gave those kids a chance to do that, and I thought that was really great. The discussions, like one of the groups I was with, the lady from I forget the name of that group.
Creative discourse.
Creative Discourse. She's the dean of the engineering department at UVM, and we were talking about different aspects of education and so forth. And as she put it, people in our group were all former administrators, educators, whatever. So we had a lot to talk about. But one of the things that emphasized how good it was to me was listening to my wife talk about it afterward, because she's not an educator. She was a director of a nonprofit in her career, but she thought it was fantastic, and hearing her positive comments about it led me to believe that's how other people. When you're an educator, I'm biased, like I was tonight, but she wasn't. She didn't have a bias coming into it, so she thought it was really good. And we went to different groups. We didn't stay together, so we had a good way of discussing what happened afterward. There were some people, as we know, some people go to AA, some people go to Al-Anon, and some people go to on and on and on. They talk too much. And so after this meeting, I will join on and on and on. So, anyway, I thought it was a really great day. I thought it was, the district's taking a risk, having students talk about what bothers them and issues that they've had and so forth. But that's what it's all about. That's what should happen. I thought it was great.
Yeah, so I'd say that video is probably, for me, one of the most powerful things with the students. And like I said earlier, I left there feeling actually kind of sad at the state of affairs and hopeful that, we're moving towards the right path. But it was eye-opening, for sure, listening to the students. And also the parents there who have, you know, who have different experiences than I did and my kids did. You know, my kids had a good experience, which I'm obviously happy about. But it's not the same for everyone, so.
Just something that just came by, to speak to the, what was discussed with the literacy bit, with the varying grade levels. Something that actually came up verbatim in the group that I discussed was a teacher saying, I've got some kids who are reading at 2 grade levels ahead and some who are at 4 grade levels behind. So like that, you know, when you mentioned that in your presentation, I heard that on Saturday.
I'm really excited about the day. I think it really starts off, you know, Charlie, you said, you know, what do we do with it next? And that's that group, the steering committee, as they said at the end, that designed that day is going to come together and bring recommendations to our goals subcommittee and to this board. And really what this board needs to do is listen to those recommendations and then task the leadership team to go create a strategic plan for 3 to 5 years and come back and look at it and give us some hard questions and say, did we get it right? And, you know, and come to agreement. And we talked about this a while ago when we were talking about setting all this up last fall, and then being able to really take that and then now let's put it into steps into action. And what we'll get out of that is some real recommended, like, we think these are some of the first steps. And, you know, we'll all 100%, and Sue McCormick, who was leading the discussion there along with Zariah, they said very clearly, like, we'll get a bunch of recommendations here, but don't think 100% of all of them are going to get enacted. But it really kind of gives an idea. And I think it's incumbent on us, and I really mean the us of leadership team and board. As you said, those are the committed folks. So as we develop these recommendations and into goals and into the strategic plan, how do we do what's called, I'm going in my dissertation work, thin engagement, so quick, easy feedback on did we get this right, without people having to read a whole novel or a whole 50-page plan. So we got to figure that out. I think we will.
Alrighty, we're going to move on to the negotiations update, and this is something that will be moved into executive session because we've made a finding that premature general public knowledge would clearly place our public body at a substantial disadvantage. So that will be moved into executive session. So new business, NCTC purchase of a multifunction school activity bus. We're looking for action on this. The administration recommends it, or is looking for, we're looking for a motion to award the contract for the NCTC purchase of the used multifunction school activity bus to Tesco for stock number U11684. So I'm looking for a motion to award that bid.
Doesn't matter. The number was wrong. I don't know if that makes a difference.
What did I say?
864 or something like that.
U11464?
There you go.
Okay.
Sorry.
So I'm looking for a motion, so then we could, all right,
So,
Katie.
yep.
Is there a second?
Second.
Suzanne? And then discussion. Maybe you
So
can speak
I'll
to this.
start. I'll answer Beth's question right at the beginning, which is every year we have close down money that happens and all the schools are told what they have based on their budgets and what they have left. And there's items that are on a list because if we make our budget so tight that we don't have any discretionary funds and something happens, we would be in a place where we could go into debt. And it's been clear in my career, I've never asked this question of this board, but I've always managed on, and I think I'll ask Martha, but I think this district has always managed on before it was Maple Run, when it was Fancon Central as well, that you have enough discretionary funds to be able to make sure that if something happens, and that can happen either in personnel, in students, or in facilities. And so this was part of the close down process. Every school knew what their balances were. March, we gave people what they had. And This was I think the top priority. Leanne and Martha can present more to you. But that's how this worked.
Do you,
Yeah, you'll have to come up to the microphone so they can hear you.
So, good evening. Per the requirement for the board, this purchase has to come to you because it's over $40,000. Currently, Northwest Career Tech Center has 3 multi-use activity school buses, and we use them for our building trades program, and we use them for our outdoor technology program, who travel off-site. And also, we use them for other special activities. So, for example, last week, there was a Skills USA competition in Randolph, and I have my license, and I was able to drive 14 students there, which was about $50 in gas. Had we contracted with a bus company, would have been about $300 for the day. So it's cost savings for us, but it's also convenience. We also share with the district. So 2 years ago, I offered a bus clinic, and some of the MRUSD staff came for the bus clinic, and they got their license. So May 31st, we have City School that's taking one of our buses down to Burlington to use it. So it's a really good collaboration that we have regarding these buses. Just trying to think if there's anything else I want to let you know about. The bus that is being requested by Ross Lavoie, who is our building trades instructor, chose that 2013 Chevy because it has under 30,000 miles, and it also comes from Florida, so it kind of keeps the rust out of the way for a few years while we keep it. And it's just under $52,000.
the funding for this bus actually comes from additional funding that the Tech Center received this year. So it is actually outside of their budget.
Okay, thank you, Martha.
Tech centers are really lucky enough to receive a lot of federal grant money because we have very expensive programs, expensive equipment, expensive supplies. And so this particular supplemental grant, we chose to use some of it for this bus, upgrading our buses so that we can continue to travel around town for off-site building trades programs and also for our outdoor technology program.
And health careers, going to the hospital and stuff like that?
Sometimes those particular instructors don't have their bus license, but our work-based learning coordinator does, and when he's available, he coordinates with all of the programs to do that transportation. And the bus companies right now are really tight on bus drivers. And sometimes they're not always available. On Wednesdays, they can't always accommodate us because there's early release through the elementary school, so they just don't have bus drivers to help us out. So having the buses has been very good for our student learning.
Questions?
Did you check locally as well? In other words, I see it's a Chevrolet and it's out of Carolinas. Did they check locally? And locally, I mean even Vermont, the number of... I would probably vote against this just because I'm a firm believer in spending. The people you give the business to the people who pay the bills. And I think there's a lot of people who sell Chevrolets in the area who pay the bills for us. So I would probably vote against this unless you can tell me that we looked high and low locally.
I can't tell you that we looked high and low locally. We used the two companies we have in the past, one of which was in Bedford, New Hampshire, who had no inventory.
Right.
And based on the previous emails that I received between my building trades instructor and the salesperson, it was they look around to get buses at that
Right.
Ohio plant, refurbish them or make them road safe, and they had very, very low inventory. And it was basically like this: we'll hold this for you, but not for long.
Right. Okay, thank you.
I understand, Peter. Charlie?
You said this came out of Florida. I don't know if we have similar bus. Do they hold up pretty well under Vermont roads in winter, like with salt and whatnot?
So we have 3 buses currently, 2 from the Tesco company from Ohio, and then the other one from New Hampshire, from Bedford, New Hampshire, and they didn't have rust when we have them, and so one of them is probably 6 years old, maybe 7 years old, and that's starting to show some rust. So most of the buses are used in and around town. We have an auto shop as well, so they service them when they can. So we try to keep the cost down, but the rust does come, and we actually did have some body work done to one of them recently.
And Leanne, can I just give a point of information with our bus contract, and Martha, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think with Tercel / Grand Avenue, Buses are retired at 8 years, I believe,
For school bus.
for school buses.
These are.
These, right, my multifunctions, they're different, but when just trying to give you an idea of life expectancy of a school bus is 8 years max.
Is there a place in Vermont that even sells, like, I guess,
No,
there's not a place in Vermont that sells them?
Not this type of bus, no.
Okay.
But you can order anything.
Right, but it wouldn't be from,
it wouldn't be from the Chevy dealership.
Well, okay, then Dodge, Ford. I mean, I don't care.
but it's a
Somebody
school bus,
locally.
right? Or,
I cannot believe that somebody locally could not get a similar van that could
but
hold.
it's not a van.
It's not a
is it?
van.
Well,
Right.
bus.
They are specialized, and maybe we could get one new, but it would be twice this. Maybe even more.
Any other discussion? So I think we're ready for a vote. So, Suzanne, is this a yay or a nay for you?
It's a yay for me.
Charlie,
Yes.
Peter,
No.
Katie,
Yes.
Jack,
Yes.
Nina. Hello? Can't hear you.
Are we muted?
Still can't hear you.
I can hear you.
Okay.
Okay.
Is that a yes?
The speaker's not. Yeah. Is it?
Amanda said she could hear us, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, it's just. I think it's the Epson one. Here. Amanda, can you say that again?
She said yes.
Thank you.
Thank you, Amanda.
Nina, what about you? Yes?
Well, that's what.
That's what Amanda was
Amanda
saying.
said
Okay.
yes.
Yeah.
Amanda?
Yes.
Yes, okay. Is Joanna here?
I haven't seen her up there yet.
All right, and I'm a yes, which means we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 and a half yes votes and 1 no vote. Alrighty,
Thank you.
next item of business. The May 17th board meeting. Want to speak to this?
Sure.
As I can.
Either you or I can. Every year there's required board chair superintendent training that happens. That's required by statute. And it's always scheduled the third Wednesday of May, which we have a meeting on. And I'm sorry I didn't catch this earlier. So we were wondering if we could move the meeting to the 24th, which is the following Wednesday. If that's going to be a hardship for folks, or because Susan and I will be attending that.
It's fine.
Fine.
All right. So we'll send that out. Thanks. Just, it makes
You
it a
don't
lot
want
easier.
to go all day and all night?
That worked for you.
I think so.
Yeah.
Just checking that it doesn't.
It just means we would,
Yes.
we'd miss 2 hours in Burlington.
Yes.
Run up
Just
here,
checking, yeah.
because it's in Burlington instead of Lake Maury, so it's a little closer, but
So I'm saying you're gonna move it to what day?
the 24th,
Okay.
we'll,
Yeah.
Aaron will do his magic that he
Aaron, do
always
your
does.
Yes.
Alrighty, next
Thank
item.
you.
Board retreat.
We had talked back on the reorganization meeting back in March of having our initial retreat in April or May. And because of the goals information that's coming, along with trying to get a facilitator for the board, I couldn't find one that was available in April and May, but I have found a former superintendent who I've worked with quite a bit. She and I actually worked together for 10 years before we were both superintendents, that could facilitate the retreat in June. So if that were something the board wanted to do, I keep working on planning on that, and that way you would have the goals information, and it might be a nice focus of your retreat.
do we have an idea of when? Would that be a Wednesday as well, or would it be?
Well, that's the next question. Do
Oh.
we want to have it, take the place of one of those meetings in June and just have the retreat be one of those meetings and have
Yes.
one June meeting for business?
I
Probably
just
the
feel like
first
June
June.
is so busy with graduations and stuff.
Yeah,
Maybe the
exactly.
best.
And the second, meeting on the third
Yeah.
Wednesday of the month be the retreat day.
Yes. Agreed.
Sounds good.
Okay, so that sounds good. Okay.
Thank
I will
you.
keep working on that. It's Tracy Rend, who I worked with in Morrisville for years, and she's been great about just kind of waiting till we got things solidified and wanted
Thank
to
you, Bill.
get that figured out. Good.
Alrighty, so moving on to other business, the warrants. The administration is seeking a motion to approve the warrants, acknowledging that the passage of this motion will act as authorization and signature of any individual board members participating remotely. So, did someone make that motion?
Yep.
Charlie, is there a second?
Second.
Katie? All right. So I need to take a vote on this. So Suzanne,
Yes.
Thank you.
Charlie,
Yes.
Peter,
Yes?
Katie? Yes. Sorry.
Jack,
Yes.
Nina,
Yes.
Amanda,
Yes.
and Susan. That's a yes. So that's 7.5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7.5 votes yes. All right. Superintendent's report.
So I have three things to talk to you about. First, you see a big paper chain that's up there. And I probably should have mentioned this for those of you who are at the summit. There's a word on each chain, and each link of the chain is a word. And hopefully the camera's kind of zooming in on that. That is work that's represented, and everyone was asked to provide a word or a couple words phrase about what they felt like coming out of the summit on Saturday. And then yesterday I had the great honor to work with 30 or 35 students from across Maple Run starting the convocation work. As you all know, that we do a convocation, the students deliver the main theme of how we're starting the year every year with us. They started with a speak chorus. It's now melded into, has a little music, a little dance, a little scenery, but it's a whole student production. And last year we had the joy of Peter's grandson, Pilot, helping to produce, direct, write, the whole 9 yards. We have 2 seniors this year that are graduating that are doing the same thing. And I know many of you have relations that are in this, that were part of it, from those who I knew were there yesterday. But we worked on the same themes from the listening session that the summit worked on. So at the end, I had them do the same thing. What was a day that, what's a word or a couple words that express the idea? And both days I heard hopeful, possibilities, energizing, amazing. I think, Susan, you kind of captured, for some people it's sad but hopeful at the same time. So I think there's a lot of promise from this work, and I just wanted to celebrate that because it's been a dream of mine since being a superintendent to really work with the community and be transparent about what our issues are and then say, let's try to solve this together. And so that to me is a real realization of starting that work, not finishing that work, but a start of that work. So it's a great piece. The other things I wanted to quickly talk about, you may have seen from the Vermont State School Boards Association a letter about PCBs and contacting your senators. I've contacted our 2 senators. If you haven't, please take a minute and do that. I know there was a listing of the senators. This PCB piece, Emerson Lynn did an excellent editorial a couple weeks ago about what this can cost to schools, and it could really be the way that brings down the public education system. If we have to do all this testing, then we have no place to pay for it from, and we've got to do all this remediation. It's a huge, huge place. And the last thing, Leanne, you reminded me by coming up and talking, I wanted to make sure I gave a shout out to Leanne, and I forgot Nate's last name. DeMar, who's the director of Cold Hollow. They hosted a great day last Thursday that was a summit of about 100 educators across Franklin County about how do we get students and parents knowledgeable at younger ages about the great opportunities that are accessible in Franklin County. The amount of jobs that are open right now that are high wage, technical career possibilities for our students, and they will pay for their we were talking about college education, they'll pay for it. They'll pay for the college education.
How early can they start?
So it's just amazing, and we had a great, because we're really saying, how do we get this down into elementary schools where kids are starting to make their first aspirations of what they want to do with themselves when they become adults. Not necessarily that's what they're going to do, but that they know about, that these opportunities, we had folks from NCSS, from the hospital, to Med Associates, to I went to Med Associates in Parago, so we did a tour in the morning, in the afternoon, we all came together, like, how can we make this happen for students to get this knowledge, and parents to have it. So it's the beginning of some great work we're doing across all 5 supervisory unions, school districts in Franklin County, Grand Isle. So thank you, Leanne. Thanks to Nate.
Thanks for your support, Bill.
That's what I have for you.
Board announcements? Peter, you look like you're gonna announce something.
No one will listen, so I'm not gonna bother. Well, just one thing, and that's that.
Oh, see?
You
open the door.
You open the
Don't
door, that's
do
right.
that.
You open the door and the cat got in. So now it's a matter of, I think that the board needs to focus on teaching the parents about the dangers of their kids and their screen time. We talk about they can't read and they can't do this and they can't do that. We did, in class, I did a thing years ago on how much time the kids spend on electronics. And at that time of their free time, they were spending 60 to 70% of their free time on electronics of some sort. We're not gonna get to the kids on that, but I know we need to try to get to the parents on that. That's a big issue, I believe, on why they don't go home and read. Of course they don't. Why
Is
would
this
they
partially
read
'cause
when
you
they
had my
can watch
kids
it on
today?
TikTok?
Is this partially because of that?
What?
My kids were at your house today, is that
That's
it?
part of
Yeah, I
it.
knew it.
I mean, they can see it on TikTok. They don't need to read about anything. And I think that that's an issue.
Well, and I do think that, kind of expanding on that, that is one of the issues is how do we, that we were talking about this weekend, is how do we engage the community and parents into the
Yes.
educational system? I think that's huge.
And I think that starts super early, right? Like,
Oh, yeah.
we're dealing with that at the preschool level. Like, how do you
Oh,
get
yeah.
that? I agree.
Actually, in relation to the screen time, one of the things that would be, if we talk further on that, one of the things I'd be interested in seeing information on, if it exists, is different types of screen time. My kids got very into stop motion animation with their Lego sets, which is technically screen time. They're on an app there, but it's much more involved than, say, if I set them in front of a TV and
Well, it's
just
social
go on.
media, right? Versus like the learning opportunities. Because
So
your kids.
social media is a huge gap for me.
Right, but that's what I'm
So-
saying. You're talking about learning opportunities, which I think is
Yeah,
a great
well,
thing for kids. It's,
I mean, and I was talking to someone not too long ago about a TV show that my kids used to watch called Super Y, which was, basically, it's watching a TV show. It's also getting deep into literacy, and I feel like there's probably differing degrees of screen time and engagement.
Sure.
And it probably boils down to the amount of actual interaction they have with the screen time. If you're just watching TikTok videos, that's probably different than if you're, say, watching a TikTok video about how to make a recipe and then doing the recipe.
Yep.
yeah, me too.
You got that all, Aaron?
You asked.
I mean, seriously, we'll
Anyone
talk
else?
later.
Anyone? Any other? All right. So that brings us. No, yeah. We need agenda for future meetings. Any agenda items for future meetings? I mean, sounds like this could be one of them.
Probably the discussion on the Collie Perlin's, the complex contract that you gave us, remember?
Right, I didn't bring that this time. just
Okay. Will
because-
that be on the agenda?
We'll get
next
it on
time?
next time.
Okay.
We should have brought it this time, and I'm sorry I didn't get there, but
Okay, thank you.
we have
Yeah.
a few things going on.
Yep.
Actually, I do have one quick question. Sax and Satech both did the plays.
Yeah,
And I know
awesome.
they were awesome. I know that they were talking about how they couldn't live stream them because of certain restrictions or whatever, or they didn't have the ability to do it, the live stream. They said that they were going to put them out so that you could get into a link. Is that something that you'll put out? I've had a lot of people ask.
If they said they do it, I would think they would. I haven't heard of any of that, but I'm sure, we can just remind
Yeah.
Angela and Joan to say, when you have that ready, just put it up.
Okay.
Which they will, I'm sure.
Oh, I'm sure they will. I just didn't know if it'd be like easily found.
Yeah, I'm sure they'll put it in their announcements,
Okay.
in the school announcements.
Awesome,
I would
thank
be
you.
surprised if they didn't.
Oh, so good. They were so good.
Because they put so much
They
in
were
the
so good.
announcements, so I would be shocked.
Awesome, thank you.
Anything else?
Were we supposed to approve Ashley Levine's, it was in the packet that she got some sort of award, were we supposed to?
We were just,
Okay, okay.
the consent agenda does that for you.
Okay, thank you.
Yep, she did a great job on getting that grant for
Yeah.
us. And that's part of the literacy pieces that John was talking
She's
about.
one of my favorites.
Alrighty, so I think now we need to go into executive session after making the findings that premature general public knowledge would clearly place our public body and people involved at a substantial disadvantage.
We need a motion.
Yeah, so I need a
So
motion.
moved. Keep
Alright,
looking at me.
Katie
Yeah, keep looking at me.
and Jack. Alrighty, so for